Well, I'm a couple days late on this, but I was gone, so forgive me. I have to talk about Boris lifting all of the Wu flu restrictions, basically, and trying to get England, at the very least, because he can't control the devolved parliaments of Wales and Scotland, which are controlled by crazy people. He's trying to get at least England back on the right path, and England has always been, the part of the UK that really mattered to the rest of the world. The terms England and Britain, English and British, they kind of are used interchangeably in the United States and in other places. And normally, I would not be mean and try and downplay the Welsh and the Scottish and the Irish, but and you know what? I shouldn't say, because I don't know the status of Northern Ireland, if they have if their devolved parliament has a bunch of restrictions or not. But at the very least, I have no problem in this situation. Scotland and Wales deserve to be dragged because they're nuts. And yeah, England's pretty nuts too, but at least they're not that nuts. Boris is turning the tide. He's starting to, really, he's destroying a lot of his own credibility, which, is fair, because he shouldn't have no credibility. After putting these restrictions in place for so long, he's basically admitting now, yeah, masks are not making a difference. Doesn't make a sense to mandate people wear masks. No more vaccine mandate, no more vaccine passports. We're not going to force that. And I've been monitoring this in Britain because you could see it coming ever since the beginning of the Omicron wave. The first data out of South Africa suggested this is very mild, kind of more like, a bad cold or a mild flu. And Boris was pausing, was waiting. We're waiting to hear, okay, Downing Street is going to announce new lockdown sanctions. They're gonna tell us all the new things that people in Britain are not allowed to do. And he delayed it at first until after Christmas, and then after Christmas he delayed it until after New Year's, and then finally he announced, yeah, we're not going to add any new restrictions. It doesn't make sense. The virus is getting milder. And once you hear no new restrictions, that means you've peaked. And so the next step is taking restrictions off, and that's what we saw this week. Now, unfortunately, as I've said in the past, continental Europe is going in the opposite direction. And, to be honest, going through this, I feel like I've said all this before, but this news did just break. This is not something that already happened. It's just, it felt like it was going to happen to such an extent that I'm getting deja vu talking about it. And again, I want to give credit where credit is due. The tide started to shift in South Africa. And you know what? I should look into to see what's going on there. I should do an update on their restrictions because South Africa, through all this, has been very draconian in their lockdowns. And considering they already had a terrible economy and like a 25% unemployment rate, lockdowns have been, I'm sure, very, very bad for people in that country. But I noticed very soon after the Omicron thing started, within that first month or so, the president of South Africa lifted the curfew, which hard to believe. Yes, they thought a curfew would help slow the spread for some reason. People, if you're out after work hours, if you want to go out and go out to dinner or go to a bar, that's very bad. You're probably spreading the Wu flu. We just want you to go and work in your cubicle all day. We only want you going outside to punch into your wage cage and then punch out, and then you need to go straight home and no smiling. That curfew was lifted, and once that happened, the next thing that happened was Boris announcing no new restrictions. And so I'm seeing a bit of a domino effect here. Oh, and also, I think that there's a bit of a connection between the pivot of Joe Biden in the United States around this same time when you have Ramaphosa and Boris toning things down. Biden came out and essentially said that the Wu flu is a state issue, and that states need to come up with their own mitigation measures. That too was a de-escalation. And so now that we're seeing an outright reversal, at least in England, hopefully we might see restrictions peak in continental Europe. The Czech Republic, their new government, also struck down or ruled out the vaccine mandate, which was supposed to go into effect in March, hasn't gone into effect yet. They were going to mandate it for people over 60 and healthcare workers. They were all going to be forcibly jabbed. They were going to be strapped down on the table and have needles shoved into their veins. I don't know if those details are quite exactly true, but close enough. The new Czech government said, no, we're not going forward with that. That is donezo. And so that's a good thing. The Czechs are one of the more reasonable European nations. But as we all know, the three-headed hydra, which needs to be slain the most, is France, Italy, and Germany. Those three are more aggressive now than ever, as I keep saying. And Britain and now the Czech Republic moving in completely opposite, South Africa moving in completely opposite directions. It's one thing for just Florida and Sweden to stand alone in the world and say, yeah, we're not going to go along with this madness. Once you start to have more countries who at one point were really, really bad, because remember, things never got that bad in Florida and Sweden. It never went down that dark of a path. The worst that it got here in Florida was restaurants were closed for a month. That was it. That was the only change that I really saw in my life. Of course, there was the mask nonsense for quite a while until people figured out that didn't really do much, and it got dropped pretty quickly. Although you go out, you still do see people in masks, because there are plenty of people who are scared by the hysteria. But I've never been told to put on a mask. I'll put it that way. And so I've had a pretty easy time here the whole time. But it's a lot. It's one thing to do that, but it's another thing to go down a really dark path and then come back. It's hard to come back from that sort of thing. And Britain is starting to do it. England, at the very least, is starting to do it. Maybe Wales and Scotland will start to move in that direction as well eventually. I mean, we can hope. And so it'll be pretty hard to hold out hope this whole time if you're in one of those countries. But hey, if Britain can come back from the brink, and again, they're not there yet, but they're starting to. There's hope for these other countries. Maybe even Canada one day. Maybe even Australia. I think a lot of us here in America used to think that the Australians were more like us than the British, and that the Australians valued freedom a bit more. Boy, was that dumb. I feel bad for any American expats who maybe chose between saying, hey, I want to live in an English-speaking country, and say, do I want to live in England or Australia? And if you picked Australia, boy, would not be fun to be you. You must feel like a real dummy. But hey, maybe if Boris can successfully steer England down this path, that'll rub off on other people. Maybe the French. Especially, there's a French election coming up. Unfortunately, I don't think that the anti-establishment guy's doing too well. But, I'll have to check up on that. I'm not following the French election closely at all. Canada, of course, had their election a few months ago, and Trudeau actually picked up seats. So, I mean, they're pretty hopeless. But, all we can hope is that Trudeau himself has a change of heart. I don't think that's going to happen. But Australia is a little bit more analogous to Great Britain in that it has a very, has a pro-lockdown Tory party. Although I guess they're not Tories, because they're the Liberal Party, but they are they're the center-right party of Australia, who controls a lot of these big states and the federal government there. So only time will tell, but I think that, well, I might regret saying this, but I was going to say, I think that this whole mess will probably be resolved in a matter of months rather than years. It's hard to believe that by this time next year, you still have continental Europe trying to mandate vaccines for everyone, when the rest of the world is probably not going to want to take them, if the virus remains as mild as it is currently, or if, God forbid for them, it gets even more mild. The next variant is more mild. And again, that is the tendency when you have these kinds of viruses. They tend to become more transmissible and less deadly. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.